fruit doesn't just contain carbohydrates and fiber. Food is actually software. It contains the software and information in it to help improve your reproductive health.
Hello and welcome to the Ultimate Health Podcast, episode 246. Jesse Chapp is here with Marnie Wasserman, and we are here on a weekly basis to take your health to the next level. This week we're back with Sachin Patel. He's a father, husband, philanthropist, coach, and international speaker. He's the founder of the Living Proof Institute, and his philosophy is that the doctor of the future is the patient. He's actively doing whatever it takes to keep people out of the medical system by empowering them through education, self-care, and remapping their mindset.
And we have the pleasure of knowing Sachin personally, and we're so happy to have him back on the show again. And Jesse and I are actually both working with the Living Proof team, and we love the work that they're doing, and we're so excited for you guys to learn more about them and all that they're up to. So here's some of what we get into our conversation with Sachin today. We talk about the different types of stealth infections, why fruit is the software of our reproductive systems, how Sachin embraces 40 and his outlook on life, plus he gets into 2 different types of mindsets, the importance of eating seasonally, and why Sachin hasn't gone to the dentist in 10 years. So much great information. Here we go with Sachin Patel. Hi Sachin, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you back on, Sachin. This time we're going to go even further back in your story and start out at your time of birth. You were actually born premature. You grew up in a middle-class, lower middle-class family. I know you don't have a vivid memory of that time, but explain what growing up in this situation was like.
Sure. So this is what I've been able to piece together, talking to my parents, my grandparents. My mom suspects that I have a fetish and obsession with cars because the day I was born a month early, by the way, so I was supposed to be a Pisces, it turned out to be an Aquarius. I was born on the day that my mom went to a car show. My parents didn't even own a car at this point. And so they realized that, hey, if we're going to have this kid, we need a car. So they went to the Toronto International Car Show, and that's the day I was born. So my mom has always felt that way, that's why you like cars so much. And now what I also pieced together is that when I was very young, my parents really couldn't afford a babysitter. So one of the traditional things to do is have your grandparents kind of co-raise you. But my grandparents were in India, so I went to India. And that's where I spent the first several months of my life. And in fact, in India, I almost died, believe it or not. I got food poisoning of sorts. And from what I've again pieced together, I was on IV antibiotics at the time. And my mom was all the way across the other side of the world while all this is happening. And her parents, my grandparents, were raising me. So that's the beginning of my story. I'm indebted to traditional allopathic medicine because it saved my life, but I'm also committed to improving it. That's where we are today.
So you were living overseas with your grandparents. What time frame was it when you came back?
I was about a year old when I came back.
And when you came back, you've shared before that you actually thought your aunt was your mother.
Yes, that's my mom still tells me the story because it just crushed her that I didn't know that was my mom because I was not around her very much at all for several months at a time, first being born. And those are very influential years in our lives. And to not have that classic mother figure can pose some challenges.
So let's take the story even further here. You're growing up, eating mostly at home, eating a vegetarian diet. What was childhood like?
Without sounding too stereotypical, one of the saving graces of immigrants is that they're too cheap to eat out. My parents would make everything at home, right? We would grocery shop. We would start with traditional ingredients, which were hard to find back then. But we would make everything at home. And part of it was because of economic reasons. And part of it was because you couldn't buy fast food that was Indian food, which is what their palate was used to, from the stores. So we ended up eating 95 to probably 98% of our meals at home. Being vegetarian, we were kind of limited at the time. And I still remember that every day I used to get teased about this, but every day I would have a peanut butter sandwich. And so for my entire childhood, even up until high school, I had a peanut butter sandwich for lunch pretty much every single day. And so, I was tired all the time. A big part of our diet is also roti, which is flatbread. So a very wheat-centric diet is what I ate growing up. My parents always wanted the best for us, but they just worked with the knowledge that they had. Our saving grace was that we ate at home and the food was cooked and taken care of with intention. My father had a garden, so some of our meals were homegrown, which I think is another important thing to share. I also feel that it's not just what's being made, it's being made fresh, but it's also being made with a specific intention. And that was our diet growing up. It was very Indian friendly, of course, but also loaded with healthy spices and nutrition from that perspective, but also very heavy in wheat, unfortunately.
And you talked about feeling tired when you were growing up. And we're going to get right into the details here. I'm sure you won't mind. You actually talk about being constipated and going to the bathroom every 3 to 4 days. So share with us what that was like.
Yeah, so at the time, I didn't even know that's what constipation was because we really don't talk about these things. They're not things that come up at the dinner table. So I was going anywhere from 3 to 4 days at certain intervals in my life. And I just thought that was normal. I just didn't realize, and it sounds so weird to say it. It's almost embarrassing to say it as a clinician and somebody who knows so much about the digestive system. But I just had an ignorance about it. I didn't have pain. I never had stomach pain or aches or anything like that. But in hindsight, I realized that I was very constipated growing up.
So you ended up eventually going to school for chiropractic. Where was this love for health in the body? Where did that stem from?
It's really interesting because my philosophy has always been that the body is very capable of healing. And I was blessed with, in hindsight, pretty good health growing up. So I wasn't ever sickly. I didn't suffer from major allergies or anything anaphylactic. And I didn't have any chronic health issues growing up. So I always enjoyed great health, and it allowed me to do awesome things academically, but also athletically. I certainly wasn't at my peak. When you're in a certain state of health, you just think that that's the way things are, and that's as good and is also as bad as it gets. It becomes our baseline. So I always had this philosophy that if we take care of ourselves, if we know how at least, then the body takes care of itself. And I never really energetically aligned with the allopathic model of healthcare. I understand its benefits, and again, it saved my life, but it just never energetically aligned. And I don't know if there's a way for me to explain that in words, but it just didn't feel right to me. One of my things is that I'm really good with my hands. I actually won the Design and Tech Award for my high school. And so I love building things and I love carving. So one of the things that I was interested in is dentistry, but then I started getting guidebooks and applications from dental schools, and all you would see is pictures of people's mouths. I'm like, this is great. And yes, it's a very beneficial profession, but it just, again, didn't resonate with me. And then I came to chiropractic and I realized that chiropractic was so much more. You're looking at the whole person. You're taking a natural approach in terms of your interventions. You're empowering people. You're also working with their whole body, not just one part of them. And if you want to work on people's mouths, then certainly you can do that as a chiropractor. You can work on people's TMJ and things like that. So it was so much bigger. The vision and the ability to help somebody was so much more profound to me and resonated with me.
Well, sticking on the topic of dentistry and the mouth, you're in chiropractic school. You have your wisdom teeth taken out, and one of the sockets gets infected and you go on antibiotics. So take us from there.
Wow, you dug deep, man. I love it. Yeah, I had my wisdom teeth pulled. I had all 4 of them pulled at the same time. It was really interesting because my parents lived in Ohio at the time. So we had the procedure done up here in Canada, in Toronto. And then the very next day, my mom was like, hey, we're going to go back to Marietta, which is where my parents owned a motel. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I just had this surgery. And to her, it was like nothing. And so we drive back and I'm like, man, I really wanted to stay there. I didn't feel comfortable. I just energetically didn't feel right to drive back. And I wake up one day and there's blood all over the pillow and my mouth is filled with liquid. I couldn't even taste it, that it was blood in my mouth. And then I go to the bathroom and blood's coming out of my mouth. And I realized that one of my stitches had busted open and turns out there was an infection. So they had to give me antibiotics. That was a real turning point for me. I felt like I was in a pretty good routine. At this time, I was in chiropractic school, so my diet had cleaned up. I was regular at the bathroom again, didn't have any issues there. I was actually at my peak weight. I was the strongest I'd ever been in my entire life, and I had my wisdom teeth pulled. And from this infection and the TMJ, I couldn't actually really eat much food for the next 3 weeks after that. And so I lost a bunch of weight that I was never able to gain back, and a whole bunch of strength that only now actually going back to those weights that I was lifting at that point in my life.
Sachin, the first time you were on the show, you shared that when you got some testing done, you found out that you were gluten sensitive. And you were also sharing growing up, you had a very wheat-heavy diet. So when you first found this out, that you had this sensitivity, and what was the testing that you were getting done as well? So let's just talk about some of the tests that you got done and finding out that your body was rejecting gluten.
Yeah, sure. So I think the foundational base that every functional medicine practitioner can agree upon is that gluten is probably a protein that we should avoid in our diet as much as we can. And as a practitioner, that's one of the first things you learn. And it's one of the things that you can get tested for. when I was a chiropractor, we had a medical doctor, Dr. Mindy Hastings, actually. She was quite innovative. She was quite advanced and forward thinking. So as my family care practitioner, as I started learning about this, I decided, hey, I'm going to ask Mindy if she can do a food allergy or sensitivity test on me. And she did. She ran a Allotest IgG panel on me. And it turned out that many of the foods that I was eating, including soy and wheat, were probably my main proteins in my diet because I was vegetarian and eating a lot of fake chicken products and stuff like that. So those two things showed up positive for me. And I was like, man, that's like pretty much the basis of what I eat. It did explain a lot because when I removed it, some aches and pains that I was having started to disappear. My digestion improved. I was actually having the opposite of constipation. So I wasn't having frequent bowel movements, but I was having looser bowel movements. So my digestion still wasn't quite right at that time in my life. But again, it wasn't painful. So that was the gift and the curse, if you will. If it's not painful, you don't do anything about it. But if it's painful, you start doing something about it. So I got the testing done and I was in denial. I actually had 4 different labs test me and all 4 of them showed up positive. And that was my proof that I needed to avoid it. And it actually took me a few years to go. I became gluten-conscious at the time. I wasn't married at the time when I learned this information. So I became gluten-conscious. And that's when I started avoiding it or becoming more aware of it and how I felt when I consumed it. But it was difficult for me to remove it 100%. It wasn't until after I had my son that I removed it 100% from my diet. And that was about 8 years ago now.
And how else did it change your diet at the time? So you were aware of gluten, but what about the other aspects of your diet? Were you still vegetarian?
I maintained staying a vegetarian at that point. And then when you start learning about wheat, and we're talking like 12, 13 years ago. So when you start talking about these things, you start paying attention to the ingredients. You know, I was a victim of marketing, right? So something was high in protein. I'm trying to put on lean muscle, so I'm going to consume vegetarian or vegan protein sources. I wasn't really focused on whether they were problematic for me or not from a protein standpoint. Like having a sensitivity to soy, that was like a very foreign concept to me before I learned all of this, right? And it's still a foreign concept to, even sometimes the average person. I had to modify my diet as best I could given the circumstances. And I basically cut out those fake proteins, those fake meats and stuff like that. I could make them and they tasted delicious, but I cut those out. That was a big change that took place in my diet at that time. And then I significantly lowered my wheat intake and then I became 100% gluten-free. That's the one thing I've maintained consistently. And I knowingly haven't had any wheat for the last 8 years now.
So how has your digestion changed over the years? Where are you at now?
My digestion is good, no pain, very regular, formed as we would kind of want from our patients, and no symptoms, so which is great. I don't get gas, I don't get bloating, I don't get heartburn. These were things that I never really had these problems. I always had what I thought was an iron stomach. What I did have done fairly recently, about 5 months ago now, is I had stool testing done. So part of my annual personal healthcare strategy is to test myself and test my family. My son was having some burping issues. Like he would burp for no reason. And we're like, okay, something's up with that. So we tested his stool as well. And it turned out he tested positive for a worm. And then when we got our results back in, I won't share what my wife's results were, but I certainly tested positive worms as well and some other stealth infections that I didn't even know I had. And so being a detective, I'm like, okay, where could this be from? So all of us had traveled to Jamaica, we traveled to Mexico, and we'd also traveled to Costa Rica in the last 12 months. And so we're like trying to figure out, okay, where could this be from? So I started calling people who were with us at these particular vacation points. And I was able to trace it back to my trip to Costa Rica because several people after the trip felt very unwell, digestively speaking. My wife and myself had no symptoms. So we were like completely shocked when we got these results back. And my son had the burping. So it explained some of that, which we've been able to get rid of for him. So that was a real shocker for me because I had absolutely no symptoms. I started realizing that you could have a lot going on, whether you have symptoms or not. And unless the average person is getting tested periodically to kind of see where their digestive system is at, you just never know. And some of these infections are stealth infections, which means their strategy is to be stealth. Their strategy is for them to create symptoms and problems somewhere else in your body as opposed to creating them in the digestive system. That's part of their survival mechanism. So a smart parasite is much less likely to get caught if the symptoms are in your joints instead of being in your digestive system. I didn't realize that I had these things going on with me, and it was quite shocking to say the least. But I also realized and acknowledged that knowledge is not immunity. So me knowing this stuff doesn't make me immune to it. I'm human just like everyone else. And you got to be careful when you travel. And one of the things we realized in hindsight is that we were drinking water straight from the tap because part of it was we were told that this water comes right from the mountain stream. It was kind of exotic, if you will, but that's kind of when I say when keeping it real can go wrong sometimes. So, we bought ourselves special water bottles now. We use a Berkey water bottle. It's a sports bottle that they have, and you can literally put swamp water in it and it comes out fresh and clean. I don't suggest you do that, but so we can travel and have precautionary measures, if you will, so that we don't pick these things up next time.
Good to know about the Berkey bottle. Marnie and I are actually planning out our honeymoon and we're thinking about going to Bali. It looks like that's where we're going to be, so we'll have to pick up a couple of those. So Sachin, a couple important things you brought up there. One big takeaway is the fact that we can't necessarily wait for the symptoms to get in and do the testing and see what's really going on underneath the surface. Can you elaborate a little bit on more what these different stealth infections could be that people would want to look into?
Yeah, sure. So one stealth infection, which can be a potential autoimmune trigger, is known as Proteus mirabilis. Proteus mirabilis has been linked to joint pain, specifically associated with things like rheumatoid arthritis. So that's one that we see quite often. We also see a lot of people testing positive for something called blastocystis hominis, very common infection that we see. It's also something that pet owners might also have as well. Certain bacteria are fine in another animal's digestive system or as part of their microbiome, but in certain quantities and concentrations, they can be problematic for humans. So some of these bacteria are normal constituents of our system, but it's when they become overgrown that they become a problem. There's certain infections that you don't want to have anything to do with, and other infections are quite common and can be relatively asymptomatic, but they can create chronic low-grade immune responses and inflammation, and they could be the source of anxiety or migraines or joint pain or skin problems for certain people. And they typically are difficult to address through conventional methodologies because they're never being tested for. So one of the things that we do is we test every patient to see if they have these infections. And now another thing that we've also done as we've kind of wisened up as clinicians is that if a person tests positive and they have a significant other or partner, we usually recommend that the partner gets tested as well, so that if you're a silent carrier of, let's say, H. pylori, you don't even know you have it. Well, problem is that you could be transferring it to your partner and they could have it and it could be creating their issues for them, and they can go in and get treatment and the problem won't resolve because the partner keeps reinfecting them. We always want to think outside the box a little bit and make sure that both parties are getting tested, because that could be a way of transferring these things sometimes.
Now we're going to take a quick break from our chat with Sachin to give a shout out to our show partner, Perfect Keto.
If you haven't tried the keto nut butter, you have to try this. It's so good. It's a combo of macadamia nuts, cashew, coconut, and MCT oil. It's so darn good. And it's something that you can mix into any kind of recipe, really. Anything from desserts to a fat bomb to just eating it by the spoon. You can throw it into a smoothie. It's super tasty and it's got some of the fattiest, tastiest nuts in there. So if you love your nut butter and you haven't tried this yet, you got to throw this into the mix. Add it to your order and give the Perfect Keto nut butter a try.
And as a listener of our show, you get an incredible deal, 20% off all Perfect Keto products. To take advantage, go to ultimatehealthpodcast.com/perfectketo. Again, that URL is ultimatehealthpodcast.com/perfectketo. Their products ship worldwide, free shipping in the US. Go and get your nut butter on today.
And now a shout out to our other show partner, Sun Warrior. And we've had a few people asking us what is in the Orma Super Greens, and I want to share with you guys the ingredients to this awesome green blend that you can add to your morning drink. You can sip it throughout the day, and it's really hydrating and really refreshing. So here's what's in it. You've got alfalfa and barley grass, wheatgrass, spinach, oatgrass, parsley, moringa, and ginger. And Jesse and I are big fans of the mint, and that just gives it a really refreshing aftertaste. It's so good. It's something we use most mornings of the week. And if you guys haven't tried it yet, add it to your cart.
As a listener of our show, you get 10% off all your Sun Warrior purchases. To take advantage, super easy to do. Go to ultimatehealthpodcast.com/SW. Again, that URL is ultimatehealthpodcast.com/SW. And for listeners in the US and Canada, you can bundle that order together, spend $100 or more, and you get free shipping. Go ahead and make Orma Super Greens part of your healthy routine. And now back to our chat with Sachin. And another important thing you brought up there was the fact that we got to be careful when we're traveling. And like I mentioned before, getting these water bottles and being careful of the water we drink. And I'm sure there's other areas too. Maybe you can elaborate on that where we might be picking these up. My other question I want to throw on there as well is if we're just within Canada or the US, can we pick these things up as well, or do we have to travel outside of the countries?
No, you can pick these things up in the US, right? So it's not something that is only for people who travel to exotic places or remote places. I mean, some people get infected from their pets. Some people get infected from their partners. People are so immunosuppressed these days that normally these things might not be a problem, but when your immune system is so bogged down, so stressed out, people aren't sleeping well, they have tons of emotional stress. I mean, our immune system normally would be able to deal with these things. The immune system would have such great resilience that these things wouldn't be an issue for us, and these parasites and bacteria wouldn't really take hold in our systems. But when we have a microbiome and an environment that is ripe for these type of pathogens, it's usually something that I almost feel like we attract these things. They're usually wake-up calls for people to kind of clean up their lifestyle and be more conscious, be more aware. And so for me, it elevated my consciousness towards my digestive health. I'm eating a lot more vegetables than I was eating before. I'm eating even less gluten-free grains than I was before. And so I'm also doing more intermittent fasting. I'm doing that more frequently than I was before. So, it elevates our consciousness when we become aware of these issues.
And you mentioned not having a lot of symptoms, when you were going through this. And I find that that's the case for a lot of people these days is they're going through life and not experiencing day-to-day chronic symptoms that are overtly present in their lives. They're just kind of this background noise, so to speak. So is it a result of just getting the proper testing done, or how else can people find these kind of blind spots in their health to bring them forward and start to get to some answers?
Well, I think everyone owes it to themselves. And if you've got kids, you owe it to your kids to really take good care of your health and realize that there's an emerging field of healthcare. So, functional medicine is nowhere close to its tipping point just yet. So I realize that this is new to the majority of the population. If I went to the mall and I told people about functional medicine or asked them if they'd heard of it, I would be surprised if even 1 out of 100 people had heard of it. So we're just at our infancy in terms of helping people understand what's available to them. I think the traditional way of looking at healthcare is from a symptom-based perspective. Like you can't really go to your doctor and say, hey, I feel great. What do you got for me? They're just going to run a battery of disease-oriented tests with disease ranges. That's not really going to give you much information. I like for people to think of functional medicine more centered around tuning your body. So like you could buy a brand new Porsche and you could crash it into the wall and then you have to take it to the repair shop and that would be like the doctor. Or you could take a brand new Porsche and you can take it to a tuner and they can add another 100 horsepower for you by removing things that interfere with performance and enhancing things that increase performance. We think of ourselves like tuners, and that's how we want to position ourselves. So you don't have to be sick in order to live your best life. Like what we do at our clinic and our institute is very different than the traditional philosophy of many practitioners. Like our healthcare programs are personal development programs disguised as healthcare programs. And unfortunately, a lot of people come to us when they're really, really sick and when other things have failed them. And we're always trying to help them live their absolute best life. So what I tell people is that you should really be taking care of your health when you're healthy. The best time to get tested is when you feel good, because then you know what it's like when you feel good, what your markers look like. If you only get tested when you're sick, well, there's no baseline, no reference point to say, hey, this is where we need to get you back to. Here's where you're at right now, right? If somebody's really sick and they come to you and they get a functional lab testing panel done and they're really unwell, well, we don't know what well looks like for them. It's imperative that people find a functional medicine practitioner. If you're listening to this, you're way ahead of the curve. Now, why don't you get even more ahead of that curve and actually get some testing done? Partner up with somebody and find some of these blind spots as part of an annual strategy. I mean, the best financial strategy is a healthcare strategy. It's a good investment in yourself to annually get tested at a minimum.
So Sachin, earlier this year, you had the big 4-0 birthday. I'm just curious, having such a milestone birthday, how has this made you reflect on life at this point?
There's a quote that I read. I don't know if Steve Jobs said it or it was about Steve Jobs, but they say you do your most important work after you turn 40. I embraced that milestone in my life and I said, now my most important work is to come. And that's how I approach every single day. So I just love all the opportunities out there. I love the abundance that's out there. I admire nature so much more. I admire my son so much more. So I feel like I've grown on so many different levels. The best is yet to come. That's been my motto for many, many years, and I truly feel that way now.
Well, having that mindset, thinking big and thinking the best is yet to come, where does that come from? Like, a lot of people aren't thinking this way and thinking big. How can you inspire some people to start thinking bigger?
You don't really start thinking this way until you first start feeling this way. So a lot of people will try to fake their way into feeling a certain way. And I believe that you have to take action, and those actions will allow you to feel a certain way. Because when you take action, what ends up happening is the universe demonstrates its abundance to you after you take action. The universe doesn't demonstrate its abundance until you decide that you're going to do something. That's where a lot of this comes from. And part of that is really trusting. The Sanskrit word for that is shraddha, which is blind, unconditional faith. Just as much as you're faithful that the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning and it's going to set tonight, that's how much faith you have to have in what it is that you're setting out to do. But then you've got to take action. And that taking action part is very scary for people. Trust is very scary, right? But taking action is the even scarier part for people. And so they never do it. So they never get to actually witness the universe's abundance. There's two different types of mindsets out there. You either have a scarcity mindset or you have an abundance mindset. With these two different mindsets, you live a completely different life. You look at the same scenario in a completely different way than other people do. When you have an abundance mindset and you see disease, you don't get depressed. What you see is you see opportunity to serve humanity. Some people, if you have a scarcity mindset, then you're scared, you're competitive, you're not cooperative. One of the things that I've learned in my businesses and the coaching and all the things that I do is I've actually studied nature. It might be a rabbit hole we can certainly decide to go down or not. But what I realized is that nature works so well because it follows specific mathematical principles. And I don't know if you saw this on my Facebook page, but I showed a picture of the human brain. I showed a picture of mushroom mycelium, which is the root network of mushrooms, which connects the entire forest. I showed a picture of plant roots, tree roots, social networks, and a picture of all the dark matter in the entire universe. And these images looked almost identical to one another. And so the reason these images look identical to one another is because they're all part of the same mathematical equation that basically drives and creates all this magnificence in the entire universe. And so when we align our businesses like this, then we start seeing these amazing growth trajectories in the influence that we have because we're following this mathematical equation that's been set out by the entire universe. So how the universe does one thing is how it does everything. And this is what we call fractal mathematics. And it's basically the mathematics of human biology as well. So one of the things that I've learned through nature is that nature doesn't compete. Nature actually cooperates. And we've been conditioned to think that nature competes. But what we're learning now more and more as our research evolves is that nature cooperates. So you guys have probably studied mushrooms quite a bit, but mushroom mycelium, which is a root network underneath the entire forest, allows nature to cooperate with one another, right? These plants are connected underneath the surface. We can't see that connection. If we look up, then all we see is competition. But if we look below, we start to see collaboration. And so as we're studying this amazing architecture of nature, we can apply this into our business. And we start to realize that we don't have to be competitive. We can be cooperative. And when we're cooperative, then the needle starts moving in the right direction, not just for you, but for everybody, for the entire market and the consumers, but also the practitioners and the businesses involved in creating this evolution. So that's kind of my philosophy is let's look at the most successful thing that we know, which is the universe. And let's abide by the laws of nature and apply those in our business. The universe and nature, for example, doesn't hide anything. It's all there. The flower doesn't not bloom because it's hiding its secret inside. It blooms fully so it can share its beauty with you. And so I just look at the world from that perspective, and I found that served me quite well.
And it gets me thinking about how if nature's in cooperation, I find that as humans, if anything, we're the ones competing with nature. We're stopping or trying to stop it in its tracks, and we're not even realizing it with all the things that we're doing to the environment and all the things that we've done to the human race, amongst each other over the years. It's just so interesting. You're getting me thinking really deep here. But how can we allow this transcendence, from nature to start to trickle into our lives, which is what you're talking about? How can we really start to allow this to teach us that this is the way it's supposed to be?
Yeah, so two things will happen. One is that I believe that humanity is moving in that direction. And the only thing that we can change is the timeline that it takes to move in that direction. Because this evolution is the highest evolution of our species, to work in collaboration with one another. And that will happen. It has to happen. How quickly that will happen is something that we can influence. So I believe that we can take that timeline and shorten it now more than ever, because of podcasts like this, because of the ability of technology to get a message across to people, because the consumer now has a voice when before they didn't, there's never been a better time for this movement to take place. And I think it is. I think we can sense there's an awakening taking place. That time is coming. So I think we're witnessing it. So there's never been a better time, in my opinion, to be alive and to witness this change, but also have a certain impact and influence on it.
And Sachin, you're a true master of sharing healthy, inspiring messages through your Facebook and helping other people in that way. And I've just pulled a couple different shares that you've shared recently from your Facebook page, and I'd just love for you to elaborate on them. And the first one here is that fruit is the software for a reproductive system. So if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So when you think of fractals, so if you're new to that word, a fractal equation set, it's hard for the human brain to conceptualize. We can think very incrementally, but the human brain has a hard time thinking exponentially and logarithmically. The math gets really, really confusing for people. But essentially, if you type in fractals and you search videos on YouTube or Vimeo, you'll see that these are patterns that continue repeatedly. No matter how much you zoom in, the pattern just keeps repeating itself. And so fractals are basically mathematical equations. And so this is the math that the entire cosmos and universe uses. And so the way the universe does one thing is the way it does everything. So getting back to the fruit being the software for reproductive health, think of it as a piece of fruit is the part of the reproductive organ of the tree, right? It contains the seed. There's a fertilization process that takes place through the pollination from the bees typically. And so there's this actual conception that's taking place when the fruit is conceived, if you will. And then the seed is being planted, in the earth for it to grow in a rich environment, if that's its fate. And so it's the reproductive organ of the actual tree itself. And so that fruit doesn't just contain carbohydrates and fiber. You're going to find in the coming years that method was used to kind of communicate and quantify food. But food is so much more than that. Food is actually software. Okay, it's not hardware. We think of food as hardware. We think of nutrition as hardware for the body, but whole foods are actually also software for the body. So the software and the hardware comes together. Now the software is fractal software, which means that, again, the same intelligence that has this math built into it builds that math into everything that it does. And this is really difficult concepts for people to grasp, but if you just realize that it's the reproductive organ of the plant, it contains the software and information in it to help improve your reproductive health. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it was around the last time we had you on the show, you were doing, and I don't know if it's turned into more of your regular routine, but an experiment, and you're consuming quite a bit of fruit at that time. So is this still the direction your diet is, or where is it evolved?
I do eat fruit. I was eating pretty much 100% fruit at that time. And to me, in hindsight, it felt really good to do that in the summer to increase my fruit intake significantly. And I felt in the winter, I felt my body needed more fats and more root vegetables. So seasonally, I changed my diet to incorporate more root vegetables and a decreased intake of fruit. I think if you're living in a sunny environment, that fruit intake year round makes sense because your food also has to match your light exposure. So the longer the days are, the better we are at consuming and ingesting and metabolizing fruit. But in the winter, we're not outdoors as much. And so the sun plays a role in our metabolic systems and our digestive function and what foods we should be eating. And the length of the day sends important signals to our body in terms of what food we should be eating as well. So I found that for me, because I live in Canada, eating fruit year round, high amounts of it was actually, it didn't make sense from an environmental standpoint. And I started feeling really cold. That was another thing I noticed when I maintained a higher fruit diet during the fall months. And that's what prompted me to eat less fruit in the winter.
So I'm going to change the conversation a little bit. In a recent interview that we were listening to you on, you were talking about the thyroid gland being the first gland of the body that starts to break down when things are going downward or when things are going in a negative direction. So I want you to expand on this and especially talking about just the prevalence of thyroid conditions these days, specifically Hashimoto's, which is something I'm going through, and a number of people, which I know who follow me and ask me questions, and I'm just seeing it in my world for sure, and I'm sure you're seeing it in your practice. So if you can just kind of take us back and let's talk about the thyroid gland and what's happening.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for sharing your story, Marnie, as well. I think that here's the thing. It's hard to know when the problem actually started. So something like Hashimoto's, for example, the problem or the process may have started many, many years in advance before even the symptoms started. There might be even months that pass after that, or years in some cases that pass after that, where people then finally get a diagnosis. The thyroid is usually tested most often. It's one of the most tested hormones on a routine annual blood workup. And also fatigue is the number one reason people see the doctor. So the thyroid, we consider that the canary in the coal mine from a symptom standpoint, but there's something deeper rooted that's causing the immune system to attack the thyroid. And consequently, there's a 50% chance that there's another organ system that's being attacked in the body when somebody has Hashimoto. So having one autoimmune condition, you're more likely to have another autoimmune condition. And not all autoimmune conditions are actually symptomatic. So we don't know which one came first, right? If somebody has vitiligo and thyroid disease, we might see the vitiligo first, but the thyroid disease may have been there all along as well. And now it could be creating symptoms for them. So it's hard because not all autoimmune conditions have symptoms, but the thyroid specifically, when we don't have proper thyroid hormone metabolism or thyroid hormone production, we're going to start feeling really, really tired. And that's one of the main reasons people see the doctor. So it gets picked up more likely than other autoimmune conditions.
Now we're going to take another quick break from our chat with Sachin to give a shout out to our show partner, CoreChair.
And we're back again with Pat Harrison, the founder of CoreChair. And Pat, can you tell us a little bit about the direction that CoreChair is going in the future?
Absolutely. Jesse, Marnie, it's great to be on your show and share some of this information. As we launched CoreChair, it seemed that a lot of our focus was dealing with people who already have existing problems. Where we're taking this chair in the future is to get to very young children, especially in the school system, and older throughout that life progression where activity is really limited at this point in time. So the idea is to create an affordable, low-cost, active sitting chair that can be used in the classroom and add to the developmental process in this age group.
Very cool. I can't wait to see how that unfolds. As a listener of our show, you get an incredible deal on your CoreChair purchase. To find out what that is, go to ultimatehealthpodcast.com/CoreChair. Again, that URL is ultimatehealthpodcast.com/CoreChair. These chairs ship free in North America. They have a 12-year warranty. You heard that correctly, 12 years. Go and get yours right now.
And now a shout out to other show partner, Thrive Market. And if you're in the USA and you're looking to do some health food shopping online, get over to Thrive Market right now and start looking for so many different incredible health food products. And on today's show, we talk about the importance of fruit. Sachin's a big fan of fresh fruit, but sometimes we don't always have access to fresh fruit depending on whether you're traveling, you're on the go, or it's just out of season. So something that Jesse and I like to do is we like to stock up on good quality dried fruits, and Thrive Market has a huge selection. And some of our faves include golden berries, goji berries, mulberries, jackfruit, dried mango. These are things that you can stock up on, have on hand, and have them for a good snack or something on the go. So get your hands on them. You're getting everything at Thrive Market at 20 to 50% off of regular retail value. In addition, you're getting 25% off your order, plus free shipping, plus a free trial.
To take advantage of this incredible offer, it's super easy to do. All you need to do is go to ultimatehealthpodcast.com/Thrive Market. Again, that URL is ultimatehealthpodcast.com/Thrive Market. Go and check out their website. You're going to love what they have to offer. And now back to our chat with Sachin.
And in the case of Hashimoto's and other autoimmune conditions, that can stand alone from thyroid problems as well. I just want to kind of clarify for people too, just the difference between having the autoimmune condition on the thyroid gland versus just having a thyroid condition.
The easiest way I could explain it that's coming to me right now, because there's probably a bunch of different analogies, but just think of it like a car that's rusting. There's nothing wrong with your car. There's something that's corroding the body. The autoimmune condition is, in a sense, corroding the thyroid gland. There's going to be a point at which the car is not drivable anymore. So there's actually nothing wrong with the car, but the rust is, and oxygen is attacking the body, and eventually it's not going to work the way it used to or the way it's supposed to. They're two separate problems. A problem with the thyroid is like the car not even working itself. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So Sachin, I'm going to jump back to the social media thing here again. There's another recent share that I'd like you to talk about a bit. And this is that you haven't been to the dentist in 10 years. So I think people would find this really fascinating. What is going on here and why you haven't needed to go?
That post got some really interesting responses to it. I guess I've been blessed with good dental enamel. And every time I went to the doctor, there would be like very little to no cleaning that they needed to do. And they're like, oh, keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, okay, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. I didn't see the dentist, but I did go to get, it was like 2 years ago, I think, I went to get a checkup. And they said, oh, looks like you go to the dentist regularly. I'm like, actually, no, I don't go to the dentist at all. And they were kind of shocked. I'll tell you what my routine is for what it's worth, but I certainly don't recommend people not seeing the dentist. I'm certainly not saying that. But for me, I actually use a water pick. I use a tongue scraper every day. To be totally honest, I actually don't floss, believe it or not. And then I use natural toothpaste. I circulate through a variety of different toothpaste and I try a bunch of different things, but I use an unfluoridated toothpaste. And the one that I use is by Organo Gold, and it actually contains reishi mushroom in it. I've also in the past used like probiotic toothpaste. I've also used On Guard toothpaste by doTERRA. That one has essential oils in it. So I rotate between a bunch of different toothpastes.
Right on. I think that'll help a lot of people. And speaking of reishi mushroom, there's a coffee that you're drinking now by a company called Organo that I believe has reishi mushroom in the mix. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So Organo Gold is the name of the company, and they're essentially a reishi mushroom distributor, but they package the mushroom into a variety of different vehicles. You could buy the reishi mushroom spores or the mycelium, which is a root network, or the flower, which is the mushroom that you actually see. You can buy that in a capsule format. So we use that clinically in our practice. But you can also get it infused into sachets of coffee. So the thing I like about that is you don't have to remind people to drink their coffee. But now when they do drink their coffee, they're going to be drinking a coffee that has reishi spores in it. And these reishi spores are excellent and have been shown in over 2,000 PubMed research articles to be beneficial at reducing inflammation, beneficial at decreasing metastasis. They're also chemoprotective. So people who are going through chemotherapy tend to respond better to it. They help with shrinking tumors in a variety, 11 different cancers it's been shown to be beneficial in. It's an immunomodulator. So there's so many tremendous benefits. And it's also one of the most alkaline foods on the planet. So it takes that coffee and now it makes it medicinal as opposed to being just coffee. So you're getting medicinal benefits in addition to the benefits that people get from coffee, which is increased mental clarity and focus. And for some people, it's their primary source of antioxidants and polyphenols.
We're big fans of mushrooms and especially reishi. We love it. So Sachin, I want to ask you about how you're using social media in a really healthy, balanced way. You're obviously leveraging social media for your business and your practice and to get your message across. But obviously at the same time, you're creating boundaries. You've got a family. You do a lot of things for yourself personally. So if you just want to share how you're balancing this.
Yeah. So for me, my secret, if you want to call it that, is actually incorporation. So I try to incorporate social media into my life. That's why I share so much, because I incorporate it into my life. I view it as what we call seva, which is service. And it's my service to my community to share what I'm doing or how I'm feeling and share my thoughts because they could be helpful to certain people. So I actually don't turn it off in the sense that, I have like, okay, I'm going to put my phone away for 4 hours and I'm not going to look at it or touch it. And then I'm going to go do this over here. I incorporate it into my life. And that allows me to be very transparent. It allows me to stay connected with my community. But then I also show my son how to use it responsibly. So if I'm firing off an email and it's just 2 minutes out of the hour, then I'm staying on top of things as well. And one of the things I think that is important for your success as a business owner is being responsive. You want to be engaged with your audience and people who are engaging in your content. And I feel that, if I check in periodically, then it allows me to stay engaged and not feel like I'm behind the 8 ball, because there are a lot of balls in the air and they can get behind them pretty fast.
I think that's a really healthy perspective and a good way of putting it, because so many of us have created social media into this monster. It's almost like going on a diet where it's the restricted food. It's like, oh, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't look at my phone during dinner and I should turn it off during these hours of the day, as opposed to what your perspective is saying is embracing it and have still a healthy balance, but instead of resisting it, utilize it to your leverage to, mirror your life to your audience. And from one entrepreneur to another, I think that's a really good balanced approach.
I appreciate that. And these are tools, right? So social media or your phone is a tool. And you can use a tool to build something or you can use a tool to destroy something. So it's up to you how you use it. And I think that's very important. Like I try to use social media in a very positive way. I think social media is detrimental if you read people's stuff and you never comment or like on it.
I was actually going to ask you about that. You mentioned staying engaged with the community. How often are you liking the feedback you're getting underneath your posts and commenting back? Is that an important part of that whole process?
I try to stay engaged in the conversation. I have to be careful, though, where I invest my time. I try not to get involved in anything that's too back and forth, if you will. So I do try to like posts. Like I'll go through posts and I'll like them and I'll respond in terms of commentary with them. So I try to stay engaged as much as I can. But when you have like 10 posts out there, because I have like a bunch of different sites that I manage, not just my public face, but I also have several coaching groups that I manage. So I've got to be careful where I focus my attention and who I respond to and what I respond to, because sometimes you just don't have time to go down certain rabbit holes.
So Sachin, we know you're a lion in the Dr. Bruce sleep analysis, and you're somebody who likes to get up early, get your day started. And I just want to quickly go through some of these different things you're doing in the morning. Starting off, what time are you waking up?
So it depends on the day. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, my eyes open around 5 o'clock. So between 4:30 and 5 is when my eyes naturally awake. So I haven't set an alarm in many, many years. Sometimes I'm jealous of people who can kind of sleep until 8 o'clock in the morning. There are days where I wake up and I'm like, man, I wish I could just lay here. I'm usually up between 4:30 and 5. And then on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I go to the gym. I meet my personal trainer. So those mornings I actually have to get up. The other mornings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Saturdays and Sundays, I'll meditate. So I spend about 30 minutes and I'll meditate in bed and collect my thoughts and kind of mentally visualize and plan my day. And then I get out of bed. I found that my wife is more of a bear. So those are the days that she gets to sleep in as well. When I wake up early Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, it can be a little bit disturbing to her. So I just stay in bed and I meditate. And then as she starts coming out of her slumber, as she wakes up, then I start getting out of bed and creating all the commotion in the morning.
And what are some of the next things you do?
So the first thing that I naturally do is I'll drink about a liter of water. So that gets the bowels and everything moving. I'll try to watch the sunrise. Depending on the time of year, we've got a few buildings that allow the sun to come in, which is really, really nice. So I'll watch the sunrise this morning. I watch the sunrise in the morning. I'll have my bowel movement, brush my teeth, and then either I go to the gym and work out and then come back, or get on my computer, do a little bit of work, fire off a few emails. When you have a young child like my son, he's usually up around 7:30, so I can get in a good, half an hour worth of work so that when he wakes up, I can spend some time with him. I'll try to drop him off as many days as I can to school. I'm not perfect. I'm not going to pretend I am, but I try to spend as much time with him undistracted as possible in the mornings. And so that's kind of my priority.
Sounds beautiful. So Sachin, in wrapping up, we have a lot of listeners who I'm sure have listened to your first interview with us and have been following your journey, or even just listening to you right now and getting inspired to take their health a little bit further. Or maybe they already have and feel like they've done everything and maybe they're feeling a little bit defeated. So what do you say to the person who feels like they've kind of touched upon everything? They've done some gut tests, they've changed their diet, they've kind of checked all the boxes off, all the things that they think that they should do, but still aren't thriving. What do you say to that person?
I'm happy that person's even asking that question and they haven't given up. So that's the first thing that I notice is what is the state of that person's belief that there is an answer available to them. Sometimes when we feel like we've tried everything, then we actually close ourselves off, because if you've tried everything, then you've kind of conditioned your mind to think that there's no more solutions for you. So the mind actually stops looking for solutions. So one of the things that we always want to do is kind of reframe that, the way the person kind of vocalizes what they're going through. Instead of saying, I've tried everything, you're better off saying, I haven't found something that works for me yet. You can see how that completely changes the possibility of what can occur. So somebody who says, I haven't found what works for me yet, that's a person who has an abundance mindset. Somebody who says they've tried everything, that's a person that has scarcity mindset. So our mindset is really important, and it'll force us to choose specific words, and these words can semantically sabotage us. And this is a whole field of study called cymatics, which is where vibration actually organizes matter. But, to somebody who feels like they've tried everything, first of all, they haven't, so it's important to rephrase that. I find typically when I get on a call with somebody that they're not doing the most fundamental things. I'll give you an example. I had a call come in from the US the other day, and it was a friend of mine, and he was asking what he could do to help his parent. And he wanted to know what tests to run and what supplements to take. And he was taking a bunch of supplements already. So they were kind of self-supplementing, if you will, kind of like self-medicating. And I said, you know what, man, let me ask you a few questions. I said, how much time does your parent spend in nature? And he said, 0. I said, how much time does he spend in sunlight? He said, 0. I said, how many times in the last year have his bare feet touched the earth? He said, probably 0. And I'm like, well, we're electrical beings. his electrical system is not grounded. So we need to do that. They ground every single house. That's why we need to be grounded. And he's also a being of light. So he needs to get light exposure. And if he's not getting those things, then his circadian rhythm, his vitamin D, his immune health, his body's electrical system is all not going to be working properly. And that's why he's going to be experiencing discomfort. He also sits in front of the computer and he sits right next to the wireless router. This is going to create some significant problems for him as well. I said, let's start with some of the simple stuff. Let's start with some of the foundational stuff, because he felt like he had tried everything, but he wasn't doing the most fundamental things. So I always encourage people to go back to the very fundamentals. One of the things I find ironic, like I work with a lot of thyroid patients, and I'm actually the executive director now of a nonprofit called Heihachi. It's really interesting because we find that people are doing the most detailed and granular things, but they're not doing the most fundamental things. And when we switch to the fundamentals, that's when we start seeing results in the granular. But if we work on the granular, we won't see results in the fundamentals. So it's always important to go back to the very basics. And for somebody who's listening to this, those are free things. They don't cost you anything, and you're going to have to do them anyways. Right? So if you take a certain supplement or you take a certain medication, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have to connect with nature. It doesn't mean you're not going to have to get your bare feet on the ground. It doesn't mean you're not going to have to get outside in the sun and recalibrate your HPA axis and your circadian rhythm. I mean, you still have to do all those things. So you may as well do them now so that you can start experiencing the benefit of them. And then what we're left with is what needs to be done. So I would say that people who've tried everything, first and foremost, need to rephrase that. They haven't found what works for them, and what typically works for them is going to have the most profound shifts is working on the fundamentals.
Love that, Sachin. I'm sure you just gave a lot of people a lot of hope. That's great. And if listeners out there are interested in working with Living Proof Institute, your clinic, what's the best way they can reach out and begin that process? And how else can they connect with you after the show?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So one of the ways that people can learn more about what we do, I like to encourage people to join our free 30-day program. So if you go to www.30in30.org, so 30and30.org, I've created a free 30-day program, and I share with you my best tips. I take you through my home. I show you some of the tools and resources that we use so you know exactly where to get them from. And I find that that's a great starting point for most people to understand our philosophy, to understand the approach that we take to health, and to give them some tools and resources that they may not have taken into consideration so they can start feeling better. And all the tips that I provide won't just help that person individually, it'll help their entire family. So, my goal is to keep as many people out of my practice as possible and help those that by helping themselves still need more support and still need more resources and need to dig a little bit deeper. So it always starts with learning how to help yourself and actually taking that action. And then when you're in that program, we certainly invite you to learn more about what we have to offer. You can also go to becomeproof.com. You can read more blog articles. You can watch some of our videos. You can learn more about our practitioners. You can also fill out a quiz at becomeproof.com, and you can see if working together is the right fit for each other.
All right, Sachin, we're going to link both of those up and your social media to let the listeners connect with you after the show. Thank you so much. Round 2 was awesome, and I know our listeners are going to get a ton from this.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate you, and keep up the amazing work.
Thanks, Sachin. Take care.
Take care.
We hope you guys enjoyed today's show with Sachin. He is such a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure there's so much you took away from the episode. And if you're looking to take a functional medicine approach to your health, you definitely want to work with Sachin's team at the Living Proof Institute. These guys are amazing. This is who Jesse and I work with, and we can't say enough good things about them. They really take their time, get to the root causes of your health, and really, for lack of a better word, dig deep. So I would love for you guys to check them out. You can go to ultimatehealthpodcast.com/LPI, see what they're all about, and get yourselves a free consult and look into everything that they do and do your research. And also, if you guys love today's show, make sure you tag us on Instagram on your stories, tag Ultimate Health Podcast and at Become Proof. Let us know what you think, share us, love us, and keep listening. Thanks so much.
Before we let you guys go, I want to give some love to our editor and engineer, Jace Sanderson, over at podcasttech.com. Jace, thanks for making us sound so good. And this week's fun fact about Jace is that recently he's been on a binge watching 80s movies, and he just watched all the Lethal Weapons and Crocodile Dundee ones. Right on, that sounds like a lot of fun. And believe it or not, I haven't seen any Lethal Weapon movies or Crocodile Dundee movies, so I got to get on it. Listeners, have an awesome week. We'll talk soon. Take care.